My name is Sylvania Harrod, and I have a fighter's heart. To me, a fighter's heart is someone who is always willing to persevere any challenge that happens to come their way. They have the courage to be able to have a vision of where they want their life to go. And regardless of the disruption that comes their way, they're willing to persevere and overcome those obstacles that come on their journey towards where their vision is. I happened to be privileged enough to join the U.S Army back post 9/11. I grew up in the New York metro area and was personally impacted by different situations that happened due to 9/11. Had many kids that were their parents happened to work in the trade center. My mother worked in the city, and so that inspired me to go ahead and join the U.S Army. So while I was in the U.S Army for just around 5 years, I unfortunately was injured. There was a large conglomeration of multiple injuries that happened, and through that, I actually ended up leaving the military and receiving my disability pension. I have right now to date, I have roughly about 23 different disabilities that I'm rated for, and it was a unique experience because you go from being in the military, going out, helping people, feeling like you're on top of the world in your early 20s to all of a sudden you're at a place where you have to relearn how to work with these different disabilities and injuries that you have. So that led me to a course of using exercise to help handle some of the pain that I was dealing with on an everyday basis. Fast forward to 2019, my family and I were in the process of moving to Denver, Colorado. One day I woke up, and as I woke up, I just felt like I was nauseous. Looked at it kind of like altitude sickness, but it typically always went away whenever I came back to sea level. My family was still living here in the DC metro area, and I would fly back and forth between Denver and DC about once every 10 days or so. So I dealt with it. I dealt with the nausea. I dealt with other issues related towards what it felt like the altitude sickness. And I got back to Baltimore around Easter 2019. And that's when the whole world stopped, because the feeling of being nauseous and having a little bit of cognitive dysfunction normally went away once I hit sea level. This day, it didn't go away. So I was like, okay, maybe it'll take a day or so to kind of get settled. I was there for about 72 hours, and it just kept staying. So I had to end up going to the emergency room because I was having just some different cognitive issues that I'd never experienced before. Slurring of words, having trouble processing information. And that led me to go to the ER. They recommended that I go back to Colorado because they would have the specialists that were going to be able to understand what was going on with me neurologically. So I flew back to Denver, and that's when it ended up actually getting worse. So we got to the place where I had to do multiple MRIs, got to different oncology clinics, and that's when they looked at me and they said, you have something called high altitude cerebral edema. Now, for those that don't know what that is, that's a swelling of the lining of the brain. So the brain begins to start swelling, and that's what start causing issues. Normally what ends up happening is this typically only happens when you're about 10,000 feet in elevation above. Those that are hikers normally have this issue. So if they bring them back down to about 5,000 or sea level, things will stabilize. In my case, it didn't. The only thing that ended up working was going into hyperbaric chamber. So they put me in a hyperbaric chamber to help stabilize some of the symptoms that were there. And their recommendation was that I move back to the East Coast and just see if it'll help with my blood, because I found out I had a rare blood disease that normally doesn't have issues with altitude, but I happen to be one of the very small cases of people that were dealing with that. At that time, you got to recall my kids were, it was 2019, so it was 12, 5, 3, and 1. So it was a very interesting experience because I'm sitting there, I'm like, what's going to occur? Is this going to go away? Nobody has any answers for you. And that was when I really got an awakening around ownership when it comes to your own medical care. because my experience is that doctors have a certain subset of questions they know. They know 80% of a topic, but anytime those 20% show up, they don't know what to do with it, because you're none of these really severe things that we know. And if you find anybody who has an invisible illness, and has these very hard diseases, it takes a tribe to be able to be willing to know what questions to ask. And so I came back to the East Coast and I looked at it and said, all right, let me start asking questions. And that's when I started researching multiple different physicians or weird cases. And it actually starts consuming you, because you're spending hours upon hours a day wondering, as I was the sole income earner and the breadwinner of my family, worrying about stuff like, hey, what happens if this keeps progressing? What happens if this gets worse? I ended up going to about 70 plus different doctors. I've had so many MRIs that like I get nauseous just thinking about sitting in an MRI because I get claustrophobic. And I ended up getting tested for multiple different types of cancers, because that's kind of the first thing. Had a couple scares where they found these weird spots on my brain, and their belief was that it could be some type of lymphoma. So all of a sudden I'm like, hold up, where are we going with this? Like, are you confirmed? Like, what is the because of this, I got to understand like what questions to be able to ask, because we're not just cutting into my head just for fun. Like, this isn't a random Thursday. Like, you need to give me some information, because if this thing doesn't work, everything that I know is not going to be there. So that process ended up leading me to finding, I would say, the first pillar of the fighter's heart, which is courage. Because there are multiple instances where you're sitting there at night, you can't sleep, because one of the side effects I had was insomnia. So it was good because I got to research more things. It was like, if I'm not going to sleep, I'm either going to research things, or my wife's going to wake up and the house is going to be clean, because I got nothing better to do with my time. And so we looked at that, but the courage to be willing to ask questions, because the mental model I had of what doctors were is that they are up here and I'm down here. When I first started in, like, they should know the answers. It's what you do all day. But through experience and getting to ask multiple questions and building multiple relationships is when I realized that they're doing the best they possibly can. There's a reason why there's these very unique specialists that happen to be out there, and these scientists that are like diving deep into these very minuscule areas. And so it's for me to have the courage to go through and find the breadcrumbs. So as I went through those different breadcrumbs and multiple different tests in multiple different ways, the amazing thing that I found out is that sometimes what you're looking for, you've already had access to. And what I mean by that is that back in 2015, I built a relationship with my friend Kat, she was the best friend she was my best friend's sister's best friend. And so I remember I had visited when I went to Dallas, and realized that her sister had Lyme disease. And so I remember having conversations, and I remember talking to her, because you're in this interesting investigation phase. And so I was like, hey, Kat, can you get me in contact with your mom? Because I'd be curious of like, what were some of the symptoms that your sister had? Because here's all the different exams. And Kat was one of the primary caretakers, as long as her mom, of helping her sister and watching this and her younger sister do this entire journey. The other thing I looked at was, let me find out if this is like, I remember my one buddy that I grew up with, and we did everything with, Ryan Britton, had multiple sclerosis. So I sat there and I asked him some of the unique things. What process did he go through? We went through all those exams, and while they did find these little small things on my brain, which they believe possibly could be lesions, but with MS, you need to have 2 confirmed spots throughout your body in order to be diagnosed with it. So seeing that I only had a couple lesions on my brain and nowhere else, I had to dive a little bit deeper. So I started researching further. I talked to Kat's mom, Leslie, and that's when she said, hey, have you gotten tested for Lyme disease? And so I go, well, yeah, I think that was in my blood work. And I go and I look and I realize nobody ever tested me for it. It wasn't even on there. And the crazy part is like, what I mean is like, sometimes the thing you're looking for, had I been there with you the entire time, is my wife was the one who asked me that question. But the magical thing about spouses is that typically they are like the jackhammer who breaks the ground, but somebody else walks by and just lays down a couple seeds and magically flowers bloom. You're like, look, there's flowers here. They helped me plant these. And they're like, what happened? Nobody that's ever been in a long-term relationship will ever experience that. I'm just letting people know. But so we went through the process, and I went and I got tested, and I didn't even wait for a doctor. There's a place called Anytime Labs. And I just went on, I paid for it. They give you a slip. I went to LabCorp and said, boom, run these results. And within 48 hours, right there, staring in front of me. Now, the unique thing about the test for Lyme disease is that test was made back in 1995. Now, other than probably, I don't even know, I probably do have a shirt that's from 1995, but for the most part, the standards of what they were evaluating is different than what it is because the disease has evolved over time. So on that test, if you don't know what to look for, you'll see it shows that there has to be 5 markers that pop up in order for the CDC to recognize you as having Lyme. CDC also does not recognize that there's a such thing as long-term Lyme or any different variations, because the initial results were done back in 1995. So getting in that community, they said if you have one marker, there's a possibility that you have others. It just may not be active at that current moment when your blood was drawn. So I go and I find out that, okay, I have Lyme. What do I do next? Number one, I found out, don't go to a regular doctor, because the other thing I found out is that insurance companies dictate treatment paths for people. So I'm like, okay, well, insurance companies say we're only going to pay for 3 weeks of doxycycline. Well, the fun part about that is that is great if you caught it within the first 14 days of you getting bit. Now, the other unique thing that I discovered is I've never seen a tick on me. I've never seen a rash on me. And all of this, through this investigation phase, I go and I start realizing that there are tribes of these individuals that are out there and they're silently suffering. Because the average person who has what's called long-term Lyme has been suffering for about 4 to 5 years, and no insurance covers your visits of where you end up going. So you end up in this interesting space of going to a lot of different doctors and these naturopaths and other things going on, hoping for a chance that you're going to see a different light, or that you possibly can get better, so you can possibly get out of bed and not have that. So that was my journey through most of 2019. We go to 2020, and that's when I finally figured out what it was, got to a doctor, and the doctor was Dr. Joseph Jemsek in Washington, D.C. Just so happened I live outside of Washington, D.C. So what was the odds that the person I'm going to find happens to be in my backyard, and was also the person that helped my friend's little sister go from being paralyzed to now she walks, talks, has no recurring symptoms compared to what it was from being paralyzed for 7-8 years. So 2020, for most people, their 2020 was my 2019. 2020 was a cakewalk, because I'm sitting there like, hang on, I finally know what it is. I spent the last year of my life in this place of constant suffering and questioning of oneself, because traditional medicine tells you this doesn't exist. You're making it up. It's all in your head. So during that period of time, during 2020, and we were during lockdown, Lyme ended up attacking my gallbladder, and it just crushed it. One night, woke up, was in pain, it was gone. They didn't know why it was like that, what was going on. I had no gallstones, I had no other symptoms that would be there other than it happened to be there. I got to spend my lovely wedding anniversary in a hospital bed because it happened the day before. So it was kind of unique. Well, in Lyme disease, what ends up occurring is that everybody's body responds differently. It can lay dormant in your system for up to 10 years and you have no idea that it occurred. All it takes is a special, unique case for things to trigger for it to be activated. And then there was belief for many years that it would go away after 14 days. It's gone, boom, never there again, like any kind of bacteria. But because it matures and it grows and it multiplies, it's always a case where you're like, hey, now some places are starting to realize that you can be in remission. And so through those moments of remission is where you have to be very particular about how you're taking care of yourself. What are your stress levels? What are you able to endure? Because when you have flare-ups, you can't control it, man. It just comes when it wants to. But 2020 was also the year that I looked at and said, okay, what is something I can do, because the pain keeps growing and the symptoms keep maturing? What I'm able to do. And that's when I found exercise. Now, when I first started getting back into exercise, because all of 2019 it was shut down because I could barely stand up without being nauseous or wanting to throw up. I had a migraine every day for 18 months. I had like crazy burning and pains in my hands, my feet, fingers, everything. The thing that I found out that Lyme ended up doing was it destroyed the myelin sheath on the left side of my body. So at that period of time, walking was something unique. Going and being able to like grab things was something unique. I've had multiple moments where I couldn't feed myself because I would try to tell my brain to grab a fork, and I could touch the fork, didn't know I was touching it, and did not know like how to bring it to my mouth. So I got to the point where I was like, well, I just don't want to eat then, because it's extremely frustrating doing that. But during COVID, I knew that the one thing that I wanted to do for my wife is very big into exercise. Like that was her escape. That was her mental health, was being able to work out. And with gyms and everything shut down, we made the choice to build a gym in our garage. We go and we build a gym in our garage, and I was like, all right, cool. I know a friend of mine used to help me do like workouts, different stuff. I'm stuck here. I might as well try working out. And when I look at that space of courage, it was for me the willingness to accept what was, not what I think it should be. I know that like when you're used to picking up a certain weight or something like that, like you don't, naturally the shame starts growing inside of you. Like you start shooting all over yourself. Like I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I used to dismount and everything. And then it just becomes frustrating to the point where you don't want to do it. And I had to get to a place of acceptance of, okay, this is what it is. But it doesn't have to be where it's going to be a year from now if I stay consistent. And that built every day of me going in and working out and spending the time and having the investment we lead to 2021. So you had lockdown, everything going on, kids at home, schools were still a little bit weird. People didn't know if they liked each other or wanted to talk to you. And we're still in that interesting phase where I found out there was a category of athletes called adaptive athletes. Now in my head, I think Special Olympics. Naturally, it's just like I look at myself, I'm like, I may have a couple screws loose, but I don't think I'm part of the Special Olympics. But the most amazing thing about that group of people is that they showed me that there's multiple different categories. And I found a tribe of people who had invisible illnesses too. Because throughout that course of that year, what I had to do is I had to teach myself how to be able to grab a barbell when I can't feel it in one side of my hand. How to teach myself how to run when after about 200, 300 meters, my left leg would go numb and I couldn't feel it and I ended up dragging it. To like how do you bench press something and you unilateral press when you don't know the strength that you have in this arm, or this arm at times will just give out and I have no control over it. So how do you balance those different weights and teach your body this muscle motor connection when it's misfiring constantly? And that's how CrossFit helped me there, because CrossFit is about being able to have the ability to move in space and move things freely. So that trainer and I had worked, like he would write me workouts every day, 5 days a week, and I would have it and I would show up regardless of how I felt, because I knew, back to that place of having a vision of where I wanted to go, I wanted to be able to do things like go run after the kids, do the dad thing and bring in groceries on one trip. All these natural things, and I held that as where I was going versus where I was at that current moment. So we go to 2021 and I found out that CrossFit, now for those that don't know, I'm a huge CrossFit fan. I had watched Rich Froning when in the beginning there was just something cool about these dudes like doing all these amazing hard things and the willingness they had to like embrace something challenging. When we got through so I started doing CrossFit and I started integrating it in because my heart rate couldn't go over 150 beats per minute without me feeling like something like the world was going to stop. So I slowly but surely started building that up and building that up and building that up. And then in 2021, CrossFit announced that they were creating a special category called adaptive athletes in the CrossFit space. And they were going to allow them participate in the open. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not going against these like genetically created cyborgs. I get to see, and I can build a community of like my own people, because I had to get to the place of acceptance. I guess that's the second pillar. I was like, first one, we're going to start with courage. Second is moving to this place of acceptance. Um, and so I just accepted, like, okay, this is what it is today. This is where we're at. So as I went through that stage of acceptance, I began to meet some amazing people, and I start hearing these stories. And I'm a big believer is that like your community creates you. So if you're in a community of individuals who are constantly overcoming and constantly looking at challenges every day and smiling at it and be like, oh, okay, let's lean in, let's go get after it. That's what made it there. So we go through this process, and CrossFit has a worldwide competition called the CrossFit Open. You have a few 100,000 people that participate for the possibility, and we're got to be real. There's only 350 people that actually make it to the top tier of the CrossFit World Championship. That's called the CrossFit Games. So when you have 1 million people or so that are happening to participating, you're just there just to see, like, I want to be part of this community. Well, we were like, hey, there's a category for us and with adapters to be able to go do this. And I was in a division called the neuromuscular. So these are all people with neuromuscular disorders and diseases. So I go through that. I end up placing second in the open. And I'm like, how is this possible? How, like, I have no idea. And it was go from a year prior, barely being able to deadlift 130 pounds without feeling like I'm going to pass out, to all of a sudden it's like, I can do 500 pounds for reps. Like, this is just crazy how this process is going. So that led me to, like, we were on vacation down in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and I get a note saying that CrossFit is going to invite these categories of adaptive athletes to the CrossFit Games. And naturally at that moment, I'm freaking out because I'm like, hold up, that could be me. And then I got an email which is like, you have to verify what you have. And so I had no problem knowing what was going on or having that kind of information, but there's naturally that sense of shame of like, well, if medicine doesn't recognize us to be here, is anybody else going to recognize it? And so it was that constant battle because I was like, I worked so hard for this last year to be there. And so that I went through the process. I got evaluated, had to do videos and everything else that happened to go there. And that led me to going to the CrossFit Games, being there and having an amazing experience of just like all kinds of multiple possibilities. I'm sitting next to the people that I would watch on weekends. And the funny part, me and my wife would watch these competitions, sitting on the couch, probably eating junk food, because we're just like, oh my God, what is happening? And we're watching these specimens. It's like, look, I'm in the same locker room as them. I'm getting the same clothes, the same amount of swag, and I look like I broke into the place because I'm not supposed to be here. And that was kind of what happened to play there. And get out there, get on the stage. My wife is cheering. My kids are watching me on YouTube, like all kinds of things I couldn't imagine. And so we went through there. I got open up to this entire world of these different competitions. So I went to a couple other ones that I dreamed of. One of them was called Wadapalooza in Miami. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I am sitting back here in the athletes area, and these are all people that I've been watching and seen YouTube and probably bought their programs for $20 or whatever it was. Because I was just like, I don't care. Wear their cool shirts, everything. And they end up becoming my friends. They end up becoming like the people that I'm able to talk to. And the craziest part was watching them come up to me and look at me the same way I looked at them, which was, I don't know how are you doing what you do? Like, I couldn't imagine not being able to feel my hand and then doing pull-ups or picking up a barbell that's 200 plus pounds over my head. Like, how are you doing this? Like, and realizing like, yeah, I sleep. Like I don't sleep. It's just one of those things that happen to be there. And they're just fascinated with all this kind of stuff, which led me to the last pillar of the heart, which is peace. So if we look at the courage to be able to go through things, going through all the mental struggles of like what should have been, what could be, and everything across the way, and getting to a space of acceptance, to all of a sudden you can get to this place of peace of what is what is. So you've accepted it, but really getting a little bit deeper is going to a place of peace. And I know in today's day and age, cap means like lies, but sometimes our reality is not what we actually think it's supposed to be. Because if you look at what's supposed to be on paper, and we look at somebody who had the disease at the level of what I was, I see them in the forums. They're bedridden. They don't work. They struggle to keep jobs. They struggle to keep relationships. They struggle to do all those things. When in reality, I had the most amazing team there on my side. My wife has been a saint the entire time. She has been accepting. She's been understanding. My kids have been there. And it's like I'm raising 4 kids. I work at Amazon, so it's a very demanding job. I've built my own business at the same time while I'm doing that, and learning about these multiple different ways to go there. So when you look at kind of like a fighter's heart, like what does fighting actually mean? The cool part is that my body is constantly in a state of fight or flight because my parasympathetic nervous system is very, very limited in working. But when I think about fighting, I look at fighting for the vision that you have for your life, the thing that you want that you look at and you say, okay, this is what it is today, but it isn't what it has to be. If I make a choice that, guess what, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, this is the example that already exists today because it's in my imagination. That imagination was given to me as a gift. So because it's sitting there and it's given to me, I don't have to be at a place where I say, well, this is all that it can be because this is the only blueprint I've ever seen. So all of that is operated from a sense of peace because I know through all the multiple different journeys that I've had a sense of perseverance and overcoming in life, it's given me this opportunity to be here and share, because I know, I'm a firm believer that faith means trusting in advance what only makes sense in reverse. So I know that if there's a challenge or an opportunity in my eyes for something new that pops up, you're like, okay, cool. Because I know that in a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, somebody's behind me on that, traveling that same road, and is really curious where the rest stop is. And if I wasn't the one to go ahead and plant the flag and say, hey, here's where the rest stop is, here's what's possible. Now get back up, put your big boy pants on, and let's go get after it. So 2022, we went. There was multiple different changes and focuses in life, but it doesn't change the vision of what I have. When I sit down and I think about my grandkids and all the things that's going to be made possible for them, because I made the choice to not accept what was supposed to be, but accept what could be. You learn how to feel without feeling. So I had to teach myself how to grip. I had to practice getting used to spending time with the barbell and not trying to accelerate too far. So one of the first things I learned of being in CrossFit is that this is about, we've heard it lots of time, it's about the journey, not necessarily the destination. So I don't get wrapped up in where I'm supposed to be and all this kind of progress. I just look at it and say, okay, I know that if I sit here and I grab this barbell every day, eventually the muscle motor connection will be there. And in the days that it's not there, it's like, today's just not that day. And I just stop and I'll just be like, all right, cool, I'm just not doing this. And it was hard for me at first because being that I was in the military, I was driven this is the mission. I do not stop until my mission is done. And I had to move to a space where I'm like, okay, this is what it is. It is what it is. And get in that space of acceptance. So yeah, it was just lots of practice. It was lots of movement, lots of training, all other muscles around, so that I got used to it. Doing lots of unilateral work so that I could my body got used to the movement of that. And then eventually what ends up happening is that like I use straps. There was to make sure that my grip was on there at first as I build it up and build it up. And then eventually it started hooking to be able to be there. So it was like, okay, I can start envisioning my body being able to move. I can start because the imagination is an amazing tool. Like if we think about it, who's thinking a thought? You know what I mean? Like, is it this weird thing with a meat suit around it that's thinking a thought? Like, so if there's this weird thing that tells us unconsciously to breathe and to do other things, can I ask it to do other things for me? It's not going to make me grow like 7, 8 inches and make me an NBA player, but like, can I teach it how to like walk? How to teach it how to talk? When it came to CrossFit, unfortunately, CrossFit changed some of their requirements of like what happens in our category. So I no longer will be doing competitive CrossFit. What I have done is I started working with an organization called Rocks to help them with their adaptive program to help drive people to have a new community where they're able to go. When I think about like professionally, not only accelerating my career, but realistically, what I look at is being a pillar of light. With a name like Sylvania, like the light bulb, it is something that I always look at like, how am I going to brighten up people's day? Because in life, we have the opportunity when we meet people, we can either be an air purifier or we can be a trash truck, spewing our stuff all over people. And I've seen so many trash trucks out there that it'd be nice for somebody to come in and they just brighten up your day whenever you happen to be there. So my goal every day is to make somebody smile, laugh. I love stand-up comedy. But when I look at my business of what I look to do, it's more of finding the hard things that people are dealing with in life and then simplifying it so they have a process of somebody there in the foxhole with them that's going to be able to help them. So business-wise, it's there. Family-wise, it's just showing up and being dad, making like cracking jokes, embarrassing them. And then as a husband, just being a constant better version of myself and showing up so that therefore that love just keeps growing beyond measure. Believe yourself. And what I mean by that is that I believe our body has an amazing amount of intelligence. As I mentioned before, that idea or that situation that is planted into that is within your body is there for a reason. It's not because you're being punished. It's not because of all this other kind of nonsense. It's because you have been given that for a reason. Why? That's up for you to discover. But believe that there is other possibilities out there. The amazing thing is we have technology, and I don't even know what technology is going to look like in multiple years from now. But hold on to that and make sure you build a very strong team of people around you to help support you on the dark nights of the soul.